We begin with new developments this morning in the investigation into that deadly shooting on the set of the movie involving Alec Baldwin.
Authorities say that criminal charges are still possible in the case. The district attorney told NBC News Now last night that corners were cut on the set. Investigators are interviewing crew members who inspected or handled the gun that fired the fatal shot. Here's the Santa Fe County Sheriff.
Well, I think the facts are clear. A weapon was handed to Mr. Baldwin. The weapon is functional and fired a live round, killing Ms. Hutchins and injuring Mr. Souza.
The sheriff said police collected 3 firearms and about 500 rounds of ammunition on set. That includes blanks and some that may be live rounds.
According to a search warrant affidavit, the film's assistant director, David Halls, told authorities he should have checked the gun more thoroughly. Halls announced the gun was safe to use before handing it to Baldwin.
Joining us now with the very latest on this is MSNBC anchor Yasmin Vasugian. She's in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We also have NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos here to help us understand where this case stands. Yasmin, let's start with you. During this news conference, did we learn anything else about the events leading up to the shooting, or if someone could be criminally charged?
We did a couple of things. We learned some things obviously still in question here. First and foremost is a live round killed Helena Hutchins. That was the headline coming out of the press conference as of yesterday. Some questions still stand, though. Why were there live rounds on the set of the film Rust? And also, on top of that, you know, it's the question of culpability. Who should be held responsible for what took place? 2 people handled that firearm before it made it to Alec Baldwin. There's Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. She is the armorer, 24 years old. This is only her second job as head armorer. She said she checked for hot rounds before they broke for lunch. Once they returned from lunch, that's when rehearsals began, and that's when the tragedy took place, and Helena Hutchins was, in fact, killed. Then Dave Halls comes into the picture. Dave Halls, the assistant director, he was actually fired from a movie set back in 2019 because of the mishandling of firearms. He said, and I quote in his statement during this affidavit, I want to read this, I checked the barrel for obstructions. Most of the time there's no live fire. She, Hannah, opens the hatch and spins the drum, and I say cold gun on set. We know, Joe, that he did in fact call out cold gun on the set before handing that gun over to Alec Baldwin, which means this thing is safe. That's movie term for this thing is safe. He went on in this affidavit. David advised when Hannah showed him the firearm before continuing rehearsal, he could only remember seeing 3 rounds. He advised he should have checked all of them, but did not, and couldn't recall if she spun the drum. One other thing that stood out to me, guys, is the fact that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed in this affidavit was asked, are there ever live rounds on a movie set? She said, absolutely not. Well, we now know a live round, in fact, killed Helena Hutchins. On top of that, 500 rounds of ammunition were recovered from the set by investigators, now being tested at Quantico. And the sheriff yesterday saying, in fact, he believes some of those rounds were live lethal rounds. So then there's the question of whether or not charges will be filed, criminal and or civil. I know Danny Savalos is going to be getting into this a little bit more with a little bit more detail, but we heard from the district attorney yesterday. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
All options are on the table at this point. I'm not commenting on charges, whether they will be filed or not, or on whom. So the answer is we cannot answer that question yet until we complete a more thorough investigation.
It's going to be a long, drawn-out investigation, possibly weeks, if not months, to deduce what they should do moving forward. They got 90 witnesses they have to interview, look at their testimony as well. 500 rounds of ammunition, once again, having to be tested to figure out what they should do to move forward, guys. So this is still very much an open, active investigation as we begin to piece things together.
Yasmin, you talk about those interviews that are going to need to be taking place as this investigation unfolds. Do we know anything from Hannah directly? Has she been interviewed? Will she be interviewed?
So, yes, she was interviewed in that affidavit that I mentioned, and she talked about what led up to the shooting. Again, she said that she checked for hot rounds in the firearm before they broke for lunch, and then that firearm was subsequently placed in a prop truck. They then got the firearm out of the prop truck and brought it over to a cart in which 3 guns were placed on a cart. And then Dave Halls, the assistant director, pulled one of those guns from the cart and handed it over to Alec Baldwin. And she mentioned, and I think it's important that I continue to reiterate this, that on movie sets, there are never live lethal rounds. And subsequently, investigators found what they believe to be live lethal rounds on set that are being tested at Quantico, and they found a live lethal shell casing in Joel Souza's shoulder after he was shot and injured on set following the death, of course, of the cinematographer.
All right. Yasmin, thank you so much. Now let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos. Danny, obviously there are a lot of outstanding legal questions here. The big one, of course, being, could Alec Baldwin get charged with anything here? So the Santa Fe district attorney says she hasn't ruled anything out. She spoke to our own Tom Yamas last night. Actually, first I want to play a little bit of that sound.
He's very important. He's the one that pulled the trigger. He's the one that was holding the gun. And so he's very important. Does that mean that charges will be filed? Not necessarily. It also doesn't mean that they won't be filed.
So what exactly do you make of that statement?
What the DA and the sheriff were doing in their press conference is playing their cards very close to their vest. They did not want to commit to anything. So is it possible Alec Baldwin could be charged? Yes, it's possible. I don't believe it's likely. And he may not, he's more likely to be charged as a supervisor than as the person who actually pulled the trigger, because the paradox, the bizarre thing about a movie set is it may be the one place in America where we say somebody handed a firearm isn't expected to know that it's dangerous. Nowhere else in America can a defendant in a criminal case argue, well, yes, I had a gun, but I didn't know guns were dangerous. They might argue I didn't know it was loaded, but an actor on a movie set is there to act. It's safe to say that other people have superior responsibility to the actor, including the armorer, the first assistant director. Those are folks that have overlapping circles of safety responsibilities for a firearm on set.
I mean, the district attorney says there's really no precedent to follow here, certainly in New Mexico. She emphasized you need to show willful disregard for the safety of others in order to be charged with involuntary manslaughter. So tell us more. What is that willful disregard? How do you determine that in an investigation like this?
We have a very confusing thing in American law. We have criminal negligence and regular civil negligence. Civil negligence is an objective standard. It asks a simple question, irrespective of what was in your mind, your soul, your heart. Is what you did something that fell below a standard of care? Whereas recklessness adds a second component. Yes, what you did fell below the standard of care, but were you consciously, knowingly disregarding a risk when you did it? And that is a much harder standard to meet in criminal cases like this, where you have someone who was just obviously, well, possibly obviously negligent. It may be a bigger step to get to criminal negligence because that requires the reckless standard.
All right, wow, really just some mind-boggling stuff that there were these live rounds even there, potentially more as they've investigated the set. Danny Ceballos, it's great to have you on this set with us.
So happy to be here on set with you folks. It's great. It's great to be back.
More of you here with us. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
President Biden kicks off his trip to Europe today ahead of two crucial global summits, major meetings aimed at tackling climate change and strengthening the world's economy. This trip comes as the fate of his own domestic agenda hangs in the balance. President Biden heads to Rome first for this weekend's G20 summit before going to Glasgow, Scotland for the COP26 climate change conference. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now, along with foreign correspondent Claudia Lavanga, who is in Rome. Good morning to both of you. So, Monica, we want to start with some breaking news. We're hearing President Biden will announce a new social spending framework that's expected to win the support of Democrats. He's expected to meet House Democrats this morning before heading to Rome. This is really a last-ditch effort to push through his infrastructure plan. What can you tell us about these new developments?
Key word there, Joe, in what you just said, expected to win support from all Democrats. Of course, they had been divided over the details over these last few weeks of negotiations, but it does appear that the president will at least lay out what he thinks his party has now been able to get behind later this morning before departing for Italy and for Scotland. Notably, before that, he's scheduled to go to Capitol Hill to meet with House Democrats and again try to hammer out a path forward. So it's unlikely that there's going to be anything necessarily introduced today as a deal, all done, signed, sealed, delivered. That will happen much later. But at least the president, we understand from even a White House official, is going to come out and talk about the new framework. So essentially reveal to the American people what stays and what goes. We know many of these thorny issues had really been debated up until late last night. So we'll get the latest update from the president before he does leave, when he was hoping to tout progress on the world stage when it comes to these major economic and climate summits. So we'll have to see what he actually is going to take as a deliverable once he is wheels up for Europe.
We should note the president expected to address the nation around 11:30 a.m. Eastern today. Claudio, I want to bring you in. President Biden will also meet with the Pope. That's tomorrow. He's becoming only the second Catholic president in history to do so. Of course, JFK the first. But this visit comes as the president faces pressure at home from conservative bishops over the issue of abortion rights. So what can we expect from their meeting?
Well, that's right, Joe. Well, if you think about it, Pope Francis is going to be the first leader, world leader, that Joe Biden is going to meet tomorrow morning before he meets other world leaders who will attend the G20. And he's also the only world leader whose picture Joe Biden has in his Oval Office. Why? Because he shares many views with Pope Francis, especially when it comes to climate change, which will be very important. It will be discussed probably tomorrow morning when the two meet. Poverty, on how to tackle poverty and how to tackle immigration. But as you mentioned, they have another thing in common. Well, they are both being attacked, if you may call it like that, by conservative bishops in America, in the U.S. Why, as you mentioned recently, some conservative bishops in America, and they've called for politicians who support abortion, like President Biden and as well Nancy Pelosi, to not to be given or to be refused communion during Mass. This has, of course, created a lot of divisions, not only within the bishops, the College of Bishops in the United States, but also here within the Vatican. Now, Pope Francis has spoken about that. He told us, journalists who were traveling back from Central Europe in September, that he thinks that that particular issue, on that particular issue, bishops, of course, including the American bishops, should really be pastoral and not political. So there will be many things that they'll be talking about tomorrow, some of which they do agree, like the ones that I mentioned earlier, and some of which they do not agree, like, for instance, abortion and same-sex marriage, even though it has to be said that President Biden said that he personally opposes abortion, but he cannot impose his views as an elected leader. Joe?
All right, speaking of meetings, Monica, tomorrow also brings the first face-to-face meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron after the U.S. and Britain announced that nuclear submarine deal with Australia. It's a deal that sidelined France, causing a major rift between the two countries. Could this meeting be an opportunity to perhaps mend some of those ties?
Yeah.
Certainly, Joe. This was a very large diplomatic dust-up, one that France very audibly said they felt cut out and really left behind, and really wanted some kind of an acknowledgement from the United States and from President Biden that that was the case. Remember, the two leaders did speak in the week or so after that deal was negotiated between Australia, the U.S., and the UK. And the White House did concede that they could have done a better job of giving France a heads up, essentially, that this was coming, but that the two leaders hope to have a very productive and friendly meeting when they do meet, of course, later tomorrow in Rome on the sidelines of the G20 summit. So we do expect there to be some fence mending and for the two leaders to talk about that very important relationship. And then also we've learned Vice President Harris will be traveling to Paris, France next month to continue to strengthen that relationship in that effort, given how complicated those talks were over the summer and given the fact that the U.S. is still saying, of course, France is our oldest ally, and they want to maintain how important that relationship is.
All right, Monica and Claudio, thanks so much for your reporting this morning. Appreciate it.
Now, in Washington, Democrats had been working feverishly to reach this agreement on the president's Build Back Better spending package. We're expecting to hear from the president today that deal may have been reached. Multiple sources have confirmed that family and medical paid leave, a key priority for progressives, is being dropped from the bill in an effort to win the support of moderate Senator Joe Manchin. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now. Leanne, good morning. So we now have this expectation that Biden will announce that a deal has been struck that has all Democrats on board. Walk us through where we're at with this revised package and how it potentially is getting all Democrats on board despite these changes.
Yeah, Savannah, there's not a lot of details yet on what President Biden is going to say, except for the fact that he is expected to announce a package that has the support of all Democrats. Now, we don't know what the details are. As you mentioned, we learned late last night that this critical issue for Democrats, paid family leave, has likely been dropped from the bill because of opposition from Senator Joe Manchin. There was also lots of questions about a Medicare vouchers for dental provisions, also Medicaid expansion as well, and also how to pay for it. So it's going to be really big news if President Biden can go into that meeting today and say that he has an agreement with Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, and something that the progressives and the moderates can all get behind. Because the reality is that is what these progressives need to hear today. They need a commitment from the president that he has the support of all Democrats if they are going to give any votes for this bipartisan infrastructure bill that Speaker Pelosi wants to pass today. Remember, those two different pieces of legislation are linked. And so this is hopefully going to give confidence to those progressives that they can vote for it.
All right, Leanne, lots to watch for this morning, especially as we expect to hear from the president a little bit later on. Thank you so much.
The battle against the COVID pandemic has sparked a battle over vaccine mandates. Now a judge says she will not stop a vaccine requirement from going into effect for the nation's largest police force. Overnight, a New York City judge ruled the NYPD and city workers still have to get at least their first dose by 5 p.m. tomorrow, or else they'll be put on unpaid leave. Police union filed a lawsuit seeking to have the mandate declared illegal. A judge will hear that lawsuit in 2 weeks. In the meantime, the mandate will stay in place. New York City is now preparing for a potential staffing shortage once it goes into effect. The vaccine might be available to millions of younger children as early as next week. The FDA could authorize the Pfizer vaccine for kids ages 5 to 11 in the coming days, though there are signs many parents may not rush to get their kids vaccinated right away. Health officials are pushing for more vaccinations as we head into the winter months and as cases drop to their lowest level since the spring. They hope to keep that momentum going. Let's bring in Dr. Bob Lahita. He's a professor at the Hackensack Meridian School of Medicine and director of the Institute of Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. Dr. Bob, good to have you with us. Let's talk about vaccine mandates. So how do you convince someone who doesn't want to be forced to get the COVID vaccine that the shot is worth getting?
Well, particularly, Joe, for police officers, firemen, EMTs. They are first-line people, literally first-line people, because when you get sick and dial 911, they're the people who are on the scene. And frankly, it's very difficult to know who is seropositive for, or rather infective with COVID-19 and non-infective. So when you pull up to a scene, you go in and you see the person in bed who is febrile and vomiting perhaps and with aches and pains, and you don't know what that is. So we mask up, you put goggles on, you wear a suit, you go in and you say, my gosh, what am I up against? So I have always been in favor for these first-line people to be vaccinated. It stands to common sense to protect yourself and your family. So there is, as you know, 60 police officers have died in New York City of COVID, and 16 firemen have died of COVID. So it is important that all of them be vaccinated. And they're expecting, as you mentioned early on, a 20% deficit in both fire and police and EMS, for that matter. And the union, Joe, is arguing about bodily integrity. So saying, yes, bodily integrity is important, but it's also important to protect you and your families.
Let's talk about younger kids who could soon get vaccinated. There are parents who are still going to be reluctant to give their kids the shot. One parent told NBC News, quote, there would need to be information out there to convince us it was necessary first, and that they're, quote, uncomfortable with how quickly it's rolling out such a small study. What would you say to that parent who's saying something that really many parents might also think?
Well, first of all, about 35% of parents are interested in having their children vaccinated. There's about another 35% or 30% or so who are on the fence. And then there's the never vaccinate my kids group. But, you know, it's important to say that for the holidays, Thanksgiving, and indeed Christmas, children should be protected. You're going to have them with family members who may or may not be infected. You'll have them with family members who are all vaccinated except for Junior, for, you know, the grandchild or somebody's child who is not vaccinated. So it stands to reason that a child should be protected. First of all, for the holidays, and secondly, to prevent them from having that rare syndrome of multi-system inflammatory disease, which is quite deadly in young children. And then lastly, schools and school teachers. School teachers and ancillary people are all vaccinated, but the kids are not. And even if the child doesn't have any symptoms, he or she is still capable of transmitting the infection.
Dr. Lahita, quickly on this last one, pregnant women have been encouraged to get the vaccine, but new research shows pregnant and breastfeeding women are slower to respond to vaccination once they get it. Should they be concerned about their level of protection?
Yes, they should, Joe. I have advocated that pregnant women and breastfeeding women should be vaccinated. Why? Because pregnancy is a special state. It's a state in which your immune system doesn't kick in right away because you're carrying a fetus which shares the foreign nature of your husband or your mate. And so the immune system is not up to par. After the second shot, it is up to par. So they're slow to respond, but very, very important to protect both mother and fetus.
All right. Dr. Bob Lahita, as always, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Severe storms with tornadoes and high winds rolled across eastern Texas into Louisiana on Wednesday, leaving dozens of homes damaged and tens of thousands without power.
NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now with the latest. Of course, hey, Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, what a day yesterday, and cleanup in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, still at this hour, 350,000 people without power. And how about those tornadoes down in Texas yesterday morning? I mean, these were like up close and personal Texas. This one kind of looks like your average tornado, and then all of a sudden it gets really intense. It hits like a barn there and a grove of trees, and things just start flying everywhere. These winds were estimated to be about 120 miles per hour. It was a very narrow and intense tornado. No injuries, no fatalities, but yeah. That was dangerous as it gets. And there were 8 tornadoes yesterday. Here's some damage pictures from another one. This one comes from Brett Adler. This is Mauriceville, Texas. This one was approximately what they consider an EF2, maybe even an EF3. And you can notice the roof of that home just tore apart. A lot of lives were changed yesterday as those tornadoes rolled through sections of Texas. So we could do more today. We're still tracking that storm system through the Gulf Coast. We had some overnight strong storms in the panhandle of Florida. Today we're watching that severe weather threat from Tampa to Orlando northwards. Right now, no severe storms, just some strong thunderstorms with some heavy rain. And as we go throughout this evening, we will watch additional storms. I-95 from Wilmington to Charleston to Savannah to Jacksonville, Florida. Then that I-4 corridor from Orlando to Tampa. We'll be watching you carefully. So today's forecast, possible travel delays, Minneapolis, Chicago, St. Louis, kind of a cold rain moving through the Midwest. And then as the weekend rolls around, we're going to watch a rainy day tomorrow, your getaway day, from D.C. to Baltimore, Philly in the late afternoon and evening, Cleveland, you're included in this mess too. And then the Northeast, you get another soaking rain on Saturday. It's not going to be damaging wind or anything like the last storm, but it's just going to be a crummy kind of Saturday. And then your Halloween forecast, cobwebs included. We will be watching pretty nice weather coast to coast, just a little bit of snow for our friends in Wyoming and Nebraska. But after this crazy weather we've had over the last 10 days, I think we all could use a nice treat on Halloween.
Absolutely.
Love a holiday weekend forecast. Thanks, Bill. See you in a bit.
Okay, guys.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.